Salam and hello, everyone. This is Lilly. As you know, we are on a break bringing you a best of series. And today on the show are my dear friends Sajda, Khalil, and Amin Hussain. The Revolution Will Be Taught is the name of this episode. And wow, you guys loved this episode. We got so much comments, reader, feedback, engagement with this episode. Just their philosophy of education for liberation, how they're parenting, how they're teaching, really, really resonated with so many of you. So if you didn't listen to it the first time, please make your chai, make your kahawa, sit down and enjoy this episode with Sagda and Amin. The Revolution Will Be Taught.
It was an orchestrated plan. Since colonialism, independence and freedom concepts we don't understand, because it's been about money and it's been about land, extraction of resources at the expense of man.
Ooh, I hope you have
Calm
all
down,
that.
selector.
Hello.
Come again. Wheel again.
Salam and hello and welcome to the show. My name is Lilly Bakala Piper and I am so glad that you are with us today. Attention to the civil rights movement was beginning to fade in 1971 when Gil Scott-Heron released his iconic and memorable poem, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. His spoken word call to action was a reminder to everyone in America to pay attention and stay focused on what generations of Black people had been fighting for. The fight for equality and freedom was not yet fully actualized, and his words still stir in the souls of people across the world today who are still fighting for equity and access. Today on the show, I have two of my all-time favorite people, fellow activists, fellow Africans, fellow educators, thinkers, and writers. They are taking the revolution to the classroom. I am so honored to welcome Sajda Khalil and Amin Hussain to Salam and Hello. They are educators, they're consultants, they are teachers who believe that education is social justice. They've developed workshops and materials that they've delivered to schools and teachers across the world who want to integrate principles of indigenous teaching and learning into their work and practice. Today, they're going to join us to talk about the importance of placing empathy and critical consciousness at the heart of learning communities. They're going to talk about why the teaching of Africa not only needs care and careful thought and consideration, but is central to everything we're learning about, whether it's math or history or art or literature. It is my deep honor and great delight to welcome my friends and fellow leaders, thinkers, writers, activists. There are just so many titles, so many hats that they wear. Sajda and Amin to the show. Karibu sana.
Thank you, Lilly. And thank you for that very humbling and generous introduction.
I'm going to try not to fangirl because, you're guests on the show and all that. But, there are times in life where God blesses you with people and you just think, wow, what did I do to deserve this? And when we met a few years ago, that was definitely the feeling I had because I had the privilege of having you as teachers to my children, and as well, we became friends. So I could not be happier to call you a part of my life and have you on the show.
Thank you. I think the pleasure is all ours.
I mean, do you feel the same way? You're quiet.
I do.
Yeah,
And I think you actually somehow, some way played a big role in bringing us your way.
Yeah.
That's another show. Another show. But I'm
day.
so glad to have you all here. So before we get too much in our feelings about having you all here, tell us a little bit about your personal background. What brought you into teaching as a profession?
Okay. We're both from Sudan originally. I grew up in Canada in a small town just west of Toronto. So like I think many African immigrant parents, there was that, hope and pressure and expectation that you are going to be something, amazing with all the sacrifice that we've put into you. So actually teaching was not initially on my radar. And I think I remember when I did tell my mom I wanted to be a teacher, she was kind of like, oh, okay, not a doctor, not a lawyer, not
an engineer.
Yeah, but it's Canada. So she's like, at least you'll get dental care, right? But no, I think the experience of being a student and a person who felt marginalized throughout most of my childhood, I felt that at that point when I really could make a decision about my career, I was very much sure that this is what I wanted to do, that education was something that I had to do, in fact. So, like I said, we both come from Sudan, but I think our upbringing in different parts of the West, me in Canada and Amin as well, it has really shown us so many areas where, in particular, students of color, indigenous students, Black, brown students really live and exist in the margins for the majority of their childhood. And only until they come into adulthood are they even able to articulate, I think, some of the experiences that they've had as students. And I know that I just really wanted to be a part of that. And I always say I wanted to be that teacher that I felt I needed.
Yeah. You know, Toni Morrison says she wrote the book she wanted to read.
Absolutely.
So you became the teacher you wanted to have.
Yeah.
I mean, how about you? What's your story?
So I was born in Khartoum, Sudan. I spent some of my formative years between Sudan and the Ivory Coast. My father was, God rest his soul, a professor of economics. And yes, somehow, somewhere I found myself pursuing my studies in Toronto, Ontario, where I met Sagda. I had just put in my resignation at the bank. I was a little bit fed up with the corporate environment, and I didn't really feel good about selling, credit products and so-called investments to people. Didn't sit well with me. And I having a phone conversation with Sajda, and she said, well, that's really because you're actually a teacher at heart, and we see that in everything that you do in your interactions with people. So stop wasting your time and put in your application for a teacher education program.
Okay.
Right.
She's kind of pushy.
She is. She is.
I would call it wise.
Yeah,
but,
you called it. You called it what you said, and here he is. Indeed.
Yes. And so I did take a leap of faith, and I put in my application. I do feel that it's my calling.
Yeah. So you came from a history of teachers in your own family, and now find yourself many years into the profession. You've taught in several different countries around the world. And the reason I'm having you on the show is both because you have deep roots in the continent, but also you've taken those roots and you've thought about the field of education, not just as practitioners, but also as some people who want to teach teachers. You want to, share some of your experiences as learners, I think, and also as educators. And so you've developed a company that has now gone around and developed workshops to empower schools, empower educators and administrators to incorporate philosophies of indigenous education into their work. And so your organization is called Indigenius.
That's right.
Am I saying it right?
You're saying it.
Indigenius Teaching and Learning, a very, very clever play on words. Tell us what that means and why you felt that was necessary.
So it's hard to Google, right? Because autocorrect always defaults to indigenous. And so indigenious is basically a play on word that aims to honor the genius within indigenous cultures. As you know, in a post-colonial era, many of our school systems are colonial legacies in many ways. And so what we attempt to do is to honor the fact that indigenous cultures have had educational practices, principles, and ideologies that are worth preserving and incorporating within contemporary educational systems. And as we know, as we progress or so-called develop, we realize that in many ways our societies are actually regressing. So concepts such as sustainability that are now emerging and a big talk, you go back to indigenous societies and you see actually they were living sustainably, right? In many ways. So that's our driving force to research these indigenous ways of learning and to attempt through them to decenter the dominant culture within contemporary school systems.
You said so much. I'm going to try and stick with the last thing you said around decentering the dominant culture. That's a really powerful statement. Tell me maybe about how your background as Sudanese, as immigrants, informed that principle of the need to decenter the dominant. How does that personal experience, or maybe it doesn't, but how does that connect to your pedagogy that you're now applying in your classrooms, as well as helping other teachers and administrators understand more deeply so that they can bring it into theirs?
Yeah, I think, one thing we always say is a lot of our experiences as marginalized people have given us superpowers. And I think no matter what your identity is, when you see a child who reminds you of your brother who experienced a very similar form of oppression in the classroom, whether it's because of their learning needs or because of the skin that they have or the hair color, their hair texture, whatever the case is, you now are able to see that child on a different level. So I think in terms of decentering, we always say it is our experience as young people living in that margin in a school system that you might be in a school system where everybody has the same skin color as you, but you're still functioning within a Eurocentric schooling system, you often feel invisible. And I think having come out of that, and we know that many of our most beloved people did not necessarily come out of the school system, intact or feeling whole.
Or successful.
Right. And I think it's a process. And
Right.
as we kind of unpack that process, it gives us the ability to really see a child who's experiencing something that maybe someone who is of the dominant culture may have to work a little bit harder to see. So I think that that's really the power that lies within not being centered and then knowing how to bring people to center.
I mean, for you, being born in Khartoum and spending time in Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, what parts of that culture show up for you in the classroom in the way that you practice education?
That's a good question. Cote d'Ivoire is actually the right way.
Thank you.
Yes.
I try.
Yes.
He's teaching right now.
Ultimately, as just to echo a little bit of what Sagda said, as quote unquote racialized people, who've learned to, or through our experience, learned to navigate a Eurocentric school system. I mean, just take the language that we are using to express ourselves here, and which is our strongest language. We're far from being proficient in our own native tongues, which are dying. Again, English is in itself a colonial legacy. So we've had to, through our learning experience or through our educational experience, and I'm talking about educational institutions, we've had to fit into a mold. Right? So many elements of your identity you would have to leave at the door, and constantly you'd feel a pressure to fit in a particular culture or to not stand out to the point where, oftentimes, and we can get into more depth later, but it manifests itself in self-oppression and manifests itself in many ways, whether it be physical or mental or behavioral in many ways. So as we go through the educational process, as we heighten our critical consciousness, we realize and begin to unlearn and make room now for new learning. So that's as much of what we do now. So it's that double-edged experience, because it was painful in many ways, but also we've gained many privileges as a result that, allows us now to be sensitive to students who are in the same predicament, but also to systematic barriers that do not work in favor of anybody.
True.
Right?
Yeah.
So, I want to get to some of the ways that you're finding solutions for identifying those barriers, navigating the systems, because I've had conversations recently. Actually, it was just the other night, Sajda, when we were in book club, talking about systems of education. And if you're in a system, you have some options, right? Do you burn it down if it's not serving you? Do you opt out of it and find a whole nother system? Do you, especially with education, do you homeschool your kid and take them out of the system? And a lot of times parents don't have those options, right? You have to be resourced sometimes to have an option at all.
Yes.
So when we don't always have the option, what are some of the ways that you are helping your students navigate these systems? Because they might have you for a year, but then you send them off into the next year and then the next year, and then they move and they go to another school or whatever it is. What are some of the tools that you're putting into their toolkit so that as they grow and mature and they understand the world and they see the world, they can navigate it, whether it's in a classroom or outside of it?
Yeah, I think, you mentioned a few minutes ago the idea of us teaching teachers, and actually we're also learning. So I think a big piece of this is that we're learners, and that's how we position ourselves with our students. And I think one of the most powerful things we can do with our students is just be real, authentic learners and show them that this power dichotomy of, I'm supposed to have all the knowledge here, and now I'm going to download it onto all of you. That's, I think, the first way that we can teach them to be revolutionary, is to notice that not one person holds all of the knowledge, and you have the right
or the power, right?
Power.
Yes.
Right. And it can be a scary thing, I think, for a lot of teachers when you have this classroom of students and they're all different and they're talking and you feel the need to really control that space. But I think in letting go of that and showing students that this is who I am, and I don't have to put on this active authoritarian with you. We can engage in critical dialogue. You can ask me a question, even if I disagree with you. I think it's that practice that really is, those are the tools. Those are the tools to be able to question, to say, I've had a student, for example, one of my early years of teaching in an almost all white and East Asian, demographic. And I'm here, this Black Muslim woman. They've never had a teacher that looks like me. And I remember I had a student call me out and say, how come everything, all the material you're using are all Black and brown people? And my first instinct, especially that I was an early teacher, was to reprimand, to say like, well, that's an inappropriate question. But really, I understood what he was saying. And I had to check myself and step back and humble myself and say, well, well, if they were all white, would you have asked me that question? Or is that just what we've become so accustomed to, that now seeing, and they are not all brown and black, but now seeing some, you almost feel like this is an attack on your identity. Let's talk about that. And we had an amazing conversation. It took, completely pivoted the lesson plan, but I think that's what it's about. It's about creating a space where kids can be their genuine self because they see you also doing that.
It's interesting because you're not giving us an easy answer here at all. You're saying some of what the teaching is the modeling. It's the living it out day to day in your classroom. Right. It's how you talk to a kid when they're like, I need to use the restroom.
Yes.
It's how you talk to a kid when they come in late. It's when they're struggling. It's how you interact with those children in addition to how you engage with the material that shows them this is how you can exist in a system that doesn't serve you.
And I think also to explicitly let them know that I don't hold all the power here. I'm also a learner. You might ask me a question and I don't know the answer. We can find out together. Yeah. I think that is the lesson, which is that we're all learners. So there's nobody that has the right to hold complete control or power over you ever in your life.
That's big. That's big because, we can talk as much as we want about kind of oppressive systems, but even here on the continent, our educational systems, which as you mentioned, Amin, are holdovers from legacies that did not serve us, are really built on teacher as superior, teacher as authority, teacher as the final say. Yes. And both my parents were teachers in Ethiopia. And, a lot of that crept into our home to as parents and in a positive way, but they would tell us kind of horrifying stories of the way discipline was handled, and the interaction. And you see it now. I mean, I've spent many years on this continent as a consultant in education. And you see the heavy-handedness of our African teachers to our African children. And so I guess I have two questions there. One, how do we as fellow Africans engage with our other African teachers who are living with a system that they themselves came up in? So the only way they know is what they came up in, right? So it's hard to do something that is never done for you. It's hard to teach what you've never been taught.
Yes.
So that's let me just give you that question. Okay. And then I'll go to my follow-up.
Well,
not that there's an easy answer.
Yes, no, there isn't an easy answer. And we're still figuring things out as we go, But I think it's important to identify the root causes of things, as you say. For teachers, for example, to recognize that the models that we are using are colonial legacies, that they come at a time where we, and I say we as a Pan-Africanist, as a Pan-African, we're experiencing a violent occupation, right? I mean, and politically, socially, and education is, where we socialize our students to prepare them to behave in a particular way in society. Educational theorists such as Paulo Freire say that you cannot separate politics and history from education. You have to have context. And to understand the context of the school and education as an institution is necessary to then make the necessary adjustments or to unlearn any traditions that no longer serve us, including, the power dynamics between student and teacher. For example, one of the many things Sagda and I do with our students say, hey, Mr. Hussain, can I go to the washroom? I say, well, going to the washroom is a human right, You shouldn't have to ask me to go to the washroom. Then we have to put that in question. But again, if we're giving you a little bit of power, how are you going to use that? Are you going to misuse that and open yourself to assault by other people or to other people misusing their power towards you? So also teaching students and teachers to be mindful and cognizant of their power dynamics and it's a reflective process, I think is the first step.
And I think too, to add on to that, I'm thinking about, working on the continent and thinking about some of the legacies and, the work that we do with teachers when we sit together and we're doing workshops. I think one of the very first things we do is reflection, and we reflect on our own experience. I think that as a teacher, if you have not sat down and thought about what was my experience like as a student, when did I feel empowered? When was that moment that I was made to feel so small? When was I made to feel ashamed of who I am? When did I, hide parts of who I... So if a teacher does not go through those reflective questions and that process, it becomes very difficult to remove yourself from that space where you're now reproducing the same harm and the same oppression. Absolutely. So I think that's always the guidance that we give ourselves and that we start with other teachers is reflect on your own experience and now think of the power that you hold standing in front of these young people and how are you either reproducing that harm or how are you breaking that, the same things
because,
we talk about as parents.
Because when you say that too, the opposite is true, right? If they reflect on a time where they felt big, where they felt seen and they felt empowered. I mean, immediately you say that and I think of Miss Brownlee, who in fifth grade, she wasn't even my homeroom teacher, but she was the first Black teacher that I had that close of an encounter with. I was in the U.S., who was the other homeroom teacher for fifth grade. I didn't have her, but she was close. And she used to race us at recess, like take off her shoes and like run and race us. And I became very close to her. It was a time in my personal development where I just needed a Black mentor. I'd never had that in my educational experience. And she came to my high school graduation. And we stayed in touch and stayed close, and it meant the world to me. And she opened the door to me to also say that Black teachers are actually in your corner. I know that won't always be true for every teacher, but it was a signal to me that I then started to seek out those teachers throughout the rest of my career, you know?
So let me start here.
Please do.
If you don't mind, because I have something fresh. I have two stories.
Okay, please.
All right. The first one, ironically, you mentioned earlier that sometimes we reproduce particular colonial legacies. This is in grade 3. Ironically, an African teacher, very loving woman, but then an African teacher, but of course spoke with a British accent. So you can tell already how her educational background was. We were at the carpet reading.
What country were you in this?
Côte d'Ivoire.
Côte d'Ivoire, okay.
We were at the carpet reading collectively, and my best friend at the time was reading, I think, a Calvin and Hobbes or some kind of comic strip, Archie magazine or something, and then flagged me, and we both started to take a look at it. He was showing me something, and I remember very vividly. It was like, the guy's shorts are so small, you know? How can somebody's shorts be so small? And we were just laughing, and then we got, of course, blasted. She put down the book. She went hard on us, and I mean, we felt it. Of course, we were in grade 3.
Felt what though? A whack?
No, we felt we felt the shame. We were being disciplined in front of our peers, and she got very angry. And my friend looked down like this, and after she was done blasting us, she said, "You don't even give me the respect to look me in the eye." And at that moment, something clicked inside of me. At that age, I understood that this woman misinterpreted the entire situation. And she went even harder on my friend. And he was also Sudanese, and I was Sudanese. And I know from our culture, if you look at a parent or an older person as a discipline, it's a sign of defiance.
Exactly.
So he was showing her respect by looking down. She operated in a Western framework. You're not maintaining eye contact with me, means you're being disrespectful. And she escalated the matter even further. So at a very young age, I knew we were having to navigate
operating in two
cultures.
different systems.
Yes.
Did you tell your parents about that situation?
I did.
And how did they react?
I did. They understood.
Yeah.
They understood. And I'm sure that they did work behind the scenes too. But they were very wise in not putting ideas into our heads. They would listen.
They knew who Amin was.
Let's put this fire out a little bit.
This fire will grow eventually.
So that's one example where we felt oppressed in a situation, ironically, by one of our own as a Pan-African, I would say. Another situation, this is a situation where we felt empowered. We were lining outside of our art class. One of the teachers that left an imprint on us. And in this case, since it was a positive experience, I give a shout out to Mr. Brown, art teacher. Yes,
and this is also same school?
In Côte d'Ivoire,
okay.
Yes. Brilliant art teacher, a Black Panther, football player, athlete. Anyhow, me and a friend of mine got into an altercation outside of the door. Fist fights, it got violent. He came out, of course, and he's loud. One time, we all settled down. Eventually, he brought us in, and then he settled the class down, took us outside. And he said, well, we're going to do this one of two ways. Either I send you guys to the principal's office now, and they're going to document this and put it on paper. It's going on your record. Your parents are getting called in, blah, 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 blah. Or you guys squash the beef now, and I decide how I'm going to discipline you. But it's going to stay here amongst us. Right?
So rolling the dice here.
Yes. And we looked at each other and we said, no, let it stay here amongst us. So we squashed the beef, and then he pulled out his yardstick, and it was not a flat one. It was a cube, 4D or 3D yardstick. And he said, both of you guys are going to take one whack.
What?
And we said, fine. He said, assume the position, put your hands on the desk. And then he swung, and then when he got close, he just said, tap.
You're kidding.
Go back to class.
That would be unforgettable.
It is unforgettable, yes. And
Mr.
so
Brown.
I understand now as a teacher that, we have some schools also place teachers sometimes in a position where they have to act as reporting agents, where you have to document particular things and for liability issues and child protection and so on and so forth. But sometimes it does not serve the child. It works against them, especially in a system that might see a black child as more violent than another child.
Right.
And he realized that he knew he was one of the very few black
Yeah.
teachers that would, stick his neck out
Yeah.
there for us. So he was
Wow.
putting actually his professional practice somewhat at risk. It's a manageable risk.
Of course,
but
course.
nonetheless, it is a risk that not everybody is willing to take for their students.
Listen to that. Mr. Brown.
Shout out to Mr. Brown.
So we got a Mr. Brown and a Ms. Brown.
Miss Brown, I'll tell you something about that word, Brown. So Miss Brownlee, if you're listening,
Shout out.
I love you.
Yeah. And to all
she
the
really
other
imprinted my
millions of
life. Yeah,
Ms.
Miss
Browns.
Brownlees all around the world. Absolutely.
The first teacher that I felt truly saw me and spoke in a way that I was like, wow, this is inspiring. Didn't happen until I was in university. So I went through 12 years of schooling and never felt a connection with, unfortunately, a single
Any
teacher.
Wow.
Until this adult, woman that I became, and I'm a young woman on campus. And it was one teacher who, God rest his soul, Arnold Dutuaro, I'll shout him out. I keep a photo of him on my wall because he spoke in such an honest and humble and truthful way that it just completely, created the space of hope for me that, wow, we could be truthful and we could be honest. And he was, of course, they're always trying to tear down his courses and, discredit whatever it is he was trying to do. But I think it was just the truth that he spoke and the love that he had for the diaspora, for Africa, for truth and justice, that for me, I said, wow, I think I could do this.
So my follow-up question is I want you just to define in that context of both teaching in the continent, teaching in international schools, teaching in local schools, teaching wherever teachers may find themselves, because teachers, I really do believe, are the heroes of our society. I mean, it's at times very, very thankless work. What does social justice mean in education? Or education is social justice. What does that mean to you? When you say that sentence, what does that mean? And what is that asking teachers to do?
Many people have said before us today that, education is really meant to prepare you for the life that you're going to live. And if it doesn't, then it's not serving you. And I think that when we talk about schools as these colonial legacies and the fact that they center some, but also exclude so many, et cetera, et cetera. We think about then, well, what do we want these students who are not centered? What do we want them to come out of this, schooling experience or institution with? And when we think about, education being social justice, we know that, if a child can go through kindergarten until 12th grade, if they make it that far, and not ever see themselves represented and never feel that they even were visible or could be their complete authentic self or could have that space to figure out who they want to be authentically, then we know we've done a huge injustice. So when we think about education as social justice, we know that it has to serve the collective. It can't be a situation where, we celebrate the fact that a certain percentage of our students are going off to these great Ivy League colleges, but yet we have students who are deeply broken or who are, and they might be amongst those people going to the colleges.
Sure.
So I think ultimately what we think about is we think about the power of the collective and we think about every single person that comes through our care and serving them justly and equitably. And for us, if schooling and if education does not do that, then we know that it's not true education. What is it doing then?
Yeah.
If it doesn't elevate the collective, it's not true
It's
education.
Ubuntu,
Absolutely.
it's just Ubuntu, which is a very
Absolutely.
heart of the culture of our continent. I mean, as diverse as our continent is, I think that Ubuntu-ness
Yes.
translates.
And I think so many times people think about education as the subjects. Well, you need to learn math and you need to learn science and you need to learn language, arts, etc. But those are subjects. And that's not what education is, something so much bigger than
It's
that.
more holistic.
Yeah.
How do you interact with people? Like schools, there's the explicit curriculum and there's the implicit curriculum.
Yeah.
In many ways, we teach students to conform. In many ways, we teach students to be competitive with one another. In many ways, we teach them to be divisive. Now, again, schools are designed in a way so that students can fit seamlessly into the workforce. So these are a reflection of our current social and economic systems. Though we're doing the work at a grassroots level, our hopes and dreams and aspirations for our students and our children is that they're actually going to redesign the way we live as human beings.
That's a beautiful statement, to redesign how we live. So let's bring it to the home. These kids go home at the end of the day, eventually. Let's talk to some of the parents who might be listening who are not educators, but they're listening at this from a lens as a parent, or maybe they're a caregiver, or maybe they're an auntie who just loves their babies and they want to be the best auntie they can. How do we start to kind of bring some of that social justice into the spaces at home for our children and for those kids that we love?
Yes. Well, you mentioned before that we're also parents. And so I always, whenever I hear any question about, parenting, I'm always like, I can't give any advice. We're trying to figure this out too. We'll see you at the finish line.
Same.
Yeah, exactly. But I think in terms of what some of the things that we try to share, and we're also trying to live by, is really being proud of who you are. I think especially as a Black person, or a person who is of African descent, or who's brown, or who feels, not centered in any way through their faith, through their race, through ethnicity, through language. I think that one of the most powerful things we can teach our own children when they come home is that we also have a tradition, and that we also have a story, and that our ancestors also had a way of doing this, and that it's not that one narrative that maybe you learned in the textbook that is the only narrative. In fact, we bring so much to this world, and we've brought so much of this. I think, especially as people from the continent, oftentimes we think that, when we're speaking our mother tongue with our family, we can be a certain way. And then when we're in educational spaces, we need to speak a certain way. And that certain places, we're not valid. Right. But I think as parents, one of the most powerful things that we can teach our kids is that, you are valid. And our way is also valid. And it's also a beautiful, thing to teach your peers, to teach your teacher. So I think empowering your kids. And some of that is even as simple as, sometimes I see little beautiful Black girls that look like my daughters with, beautiful kinky hair or whatever, and they're carrying the backpack that has the blonde Barbie on it, right? Or that has
I see it everywhere.
Right, or the Frozen character. And I'm like, as much as, I'm sure that child loves that character, like so many of their peers, it also makes me wonder, what is she seeing in that, And I think, Juno Diaz, the writer, said something really beautiful. He said, if you want to make a child a monster, you deny them any reflection of themselves.
At a cultural level.
At a cultural level, at school, at home. And I think there's so much truth in that. So I think allowing your kids to see themselves reflected in beautiful, intelligent, knowledgeable ways is one of the, I think, most powerful things.
Absolutely.
I mean, social justice work is anti-oppression work, it's work of liberation. And that means you have to be opposing particular forces. So everything happens in relation to the dominant culture, which imposes its ways upon others in a particular society or in a particular environment. Now, that dominant culture may vary from context to context, but it's primarily very Eurocentric and Western. And the idea that, the Western ideologies are correct. This is the right way of disciplining your children, or this is the right way of doing this or that, which we know throughout history has caused a lot of pain and a lot of exploitation. And so people have to be prepared, parents, to gather the courage also to resist oppressive forces when they manifest themselves in an interaction between peers, between students, or between teacher and student. We have a workshop that we host for parents. It's called Social Justice Education Starts at Home. Parents have to be hands-on.
For sure.
Even as educators, it's not wise to leave the education of your children up to institutions. You have to be involved. You have to build a genuine partnership with teachers. You have to let them know this is our framework. These are lines that we're not willing to cross. Can we have dialogue about this? And at the same time, have a particular disposition with our children at home that makes them feel secure in a sense that they can bring up any issue at home without feeling fear of being reprimanded or disciplined in a harsh manner.
Yeah. That's hard to do.
Dialogue is key. It is hard to do. It is very hard to do, but dialogue is key. Because ultimately, if students are questioning, and if you are from a culturally diverse background, you have to navigate a particular culture at home, and you come to school, you have to navigate in a different way.
Right.
It's very...
And you're exhausted at the end of the day.
Now imagine if you're a 6-year-old, or now if you're a 9-year-old or 13-year-old, having to do these mental acrobatics.
Yeah, your hormones are raging, you're developing, you don't know what's what.
You have to be able to lean into some people, right?
Yeah,
to have wise conversation, to better understand things. Yeah. So I would say dialogue is key.
Yeah.
Provide that space at home to be able to have these conversations with your children.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is curate resources.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. And
Curate
also
like
in the manner. Right. Yeah. And one thing that we've committed to doing also is through our spending power. What brands are we supporting? Is social justice just talk in the classroom, or are we actually walking the walk?
Absolutely.
Right? When we go and stay at a resort or at a hotel, is it somehow tied to a colonial legacy?
Yeah, come on now. I
Right?
mean, we've had this conversation. Hard to
All
find
the
at
time.
times.
Very hard to find.
Hello,
But, you know, even that-
Kenyan tourism agencies.
Yes, exactly. But I think even in that struggle, that's where the learning happens. So
Yeah,
we have a
absolutely.
child who's now 11
Absolutely.
years old, and so his job now is to look up the place. So we might go to a place and we say, your job is to look up we want to know who the owner is. We want to see the pictures. We want to see what it looks like. And there are times where it's so difficult and we're like, what do we do in this situation?
Yep.
And I think it's in that conversation where the learning happens. Why is it so hard to be able to go, enjoy time together at a place that doesn't have a very painful, oppressive history? Why is it difficult to find, a shoe brand that you love that is not exploitative?
Why not being made by 12-year-old
that
children?
looks just like you.
And just
That
like
looks
you.
just like
Exactly.
you. Yeah. So I think it's even in having those real conversations. I think that the one thing I would say too is to be honest. We have a lot of parents who are like, is it too early to talk about? We don't want to take away the joy. We don't want to, put this.
Well,
dark
let's talk
cloud.
about that. Let's talk about that from different angles. 'Cause
Sure.
I think that joy thing is so central. If you love a child in any capacity, one of the beautiful things you love about them is their kind of carefree,
Yes.
lens towards the world. So I think there is the Black, brown, queer, differently abled child who has to navigate the world because of the way God created them, which is beautiful and perfect in its own way.
Mm-hmm.
And they have to deal with that,
Mhm.
and they want to maintain their joy.
Yes.
And then there's a parent who may have a child who doesn't have some of those obvious burdens, who can navigate the world with maybe some more ease, and they maybe may resist including social justice because their child is 6 and they don't want to talk about those heavy things.
Yes.
I think there's two sets of parents at times that we're talking about, and sometimes we fit in both places of privilege. I sit in a lot of seats of privilege,
Absolutely.
and I
yes.
have to help my kids remember who is not sitting with us.
Mm.
And then there are times where, we're the ones fighting upstream. So
Mhm.
talk us through both, maintaining joy in both spaces and also being a proper, I don't like the word ally, so I'm not sure what the best words are these days, but,
Mm.
being socially just in both places perhaps is a better way to frame it.
Well, I think, first of all, in terms of just being honest with kids, we have a 2.5-year-old, and just the other day, she's watching one of her favorite shows, this Ada Twist, Barack
Scientist.
Obama and
Oh,
Michelle
yeah.
Obama produced this amazing show about this beautiful little Black girl who's a scientist, and
It's an
she has 2
illustrated
friends.
book to begin with.
Yes.
Mhm.
And so she looked at the screen, she said, Ada Twist is Black, like me. I said, yes, she is. And then she said, the other character,
Iggy
Iggy
Peck.
Peck is white. I said, yes. And Rosie Revere is white too. I said, yes, she is. There, I think there are so many parents who even that alone
Would shake
is like,
them.
oh,
Yeah.
why
Yeah.
are we, why did you know? Almost that there's a problem with that. Well, why are we talking about that? There's nothing, why are we even mentioning that? I think the first thing is that kids are going to come through this world and they're going to notice. So, if we act like it's not there, then we can't ever really grow and learn with them and have these authentic experiences. But I think in terms of joy, we find so much joy in justice. There's
Oh, I
humor
love
in
that.
justice,
Yes,
right? There's humor in recognizing certain things,
There's
and then
self-love in justice.
absolutely, and even those glimpses of we might not have achieved social justice yet as a global collective, but I think even the approach to it, or even striving towards it, there's so much joy within that process.
Yes, there is. Yes, there is.
And so
much.
I think that sometimes we think that there's a dichotomy. We talk about serious things, we're going to be sad and depressed, and we're going to put this gloomy cloud over our kids.
Yes. But there's also affinity, right? And in the struggle. And so funny things are one of our son was in art class, and he said that the teacher flashed a picture of Jesus Christ. And he said Jesus was blonde with blue eyes, and me, so he's talking about himself now, him and his brethren, who's in the class, also an African, looked at each other
And they're like,
started
made
giggling.
those eyes right.
And then
Mama,
we're talking about 4th grade, and then
Yeah.
they did this, they said it's
Yeah.
an act of rebellion, but at
Yeah.
least they had each other.
Absolutely, yes.
You see?
Yes, yes.
So it's never too early to begin to
Yes.
heighten their critical consciousness.
Absolutely.
And the thing is, there
Absolutely.
were giggles there. I
Yeah.
think that was the beautiful part,
Yeah,
right? And I think it's
yeah.
like when you're with your closest friend and you see something, and the two of you notice it.
Yeah.
There's humor there, and there are spaces to laugh. And if you model that, we can't fix everything overnight, but we can try and we can laugh along the way.
Absolutely,
You know, I think
absolutely,
there's a lot of
absolutely.
joy there.
And that's actually, I mentioned at the beginning, the poem, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. What's one of the beautiful things about that spoken word piece is set to music, it's groovy, it's funky.
Makes you want to dance.
It makes you want to
fight at the
dance.
same
You're like, what
time.
am I doing right now? Am I dancing? Am I fighting? What am I doing? You know, but that is, I think, the beauty of our people also.
Yes.
There is no way we survived this moment fighting for justice since the inception of time without a whole lot of joy as our fellow sojourner on this path. So,
Absolutely.
joy and justice, that's what we're about. It's
Yeah.
Salam and hello.
That's it.
So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah.
You just put it so, so beautifully. Okay, we're going to wrap up with maybe a quote from, Brother Malcolm, who said that education is a passport for the future, for tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. So as we kind of close this conversation, tell us how your work, how we can join in your work actually in preparing students, our kids, people we love, our schools, the communities that we're in for tomorrow, for the future. How can we do that a bit better? For a better, socially just future, I should say.
Yeah, wow.
And you've said so much already, but give us your best. Give us some freebies from your workshop.
Okay. I think I'm going to have to say, and it might even sound redundant, but I'm going to have to say, no matter where you are, whatever your role in this world is, whatever your position is, I think being your truest self, or at least trying to discover who that truest self could be, is probably, the biggest gift you could give any young person, because I think it gives them the permission to also do the same. So I think, if you're, a father and you're an accountant, and you might feel like my job has nothing to do with anything social justice related, I think that, that's a false narrative. I think every single person can bring justice or, learning or elevate their critical consciousness in the space that they're in. You could be a stay-at-home grandparent, you could be whatever. And I think that when children look up to us and they see that, and they see that courage to be your authentic self, to be humble, to make mistakes, and to be on this quest of learning, who your people were, what is the language that we spoke, what beautiful knowledge and ways of knowing did we offer this civilization in this time that we're living in. That is a huge lesson, I think, for kids. And I think when kids look up to us and they see us doing that, it gives them that courage to do the same.
Thank you, Sajda. How about you, Amin?
Empowers in the people,
Absolutely.
This work needs critical mass. So dialogue, again, is at the heart of this work. Understanding that we continuously have to unlearn in order to relearn, people have been programmed in a particular way based on their experiences, their lived experience, and all that they've ingested, whether it has been whether it has been pushed by themselves or pushed upon them.
Right.
So we have to be cognizant of that. And I think the other thing is modeling. We have to also be very aware of power dynamics. Our children watch everything that we do. They will do as we do. They will not do as we say.
Absolutely,
yeah.
yeah.
So how do you speak to a person who is in a lesser position of power than you, as opposed to somebody who you feel is more powerful? Just the small things, day-to-day interactions go a long way. So charity starts at home. If we begin with the self and then come together.
Absolutely. I hear you saying both two very profound things. Sajda, you saying we just each need to be free, like truly seeking that freedom within ourselves. When we are free, we will have, be seeking the freedom of others. And what you said, that equity, that justice begins at home. And, one of the questions I didn't ask you was kind of what do we have to surrender to become socially just? And I think it is a bit of this. It's that privilege, like we revoking that privilege and that power and using it in the service of others, and every day.
Yes,
and every day. So I'd like to close the show with two questions that I didn't give you in advance because I'd like to have honest answers on this one.
Lily.
So so the first one's easy. What's your favorite drink?
Ooh,
give it to me.
Ginger beer.
Oh, that is an unexpected twist. What, like Stony?
Of course.
Tangawizi?
Yes.
Okay, that's a heavy one too. That thing bites you before you drink it. It's
and because I don't drink alcohol, I feel like it gives me something fancy to drink. Right? It's bubbling.
So Stony Tangawizi with an umbrella.
That's it.
And a slice of something.
Or in a big mug if I want to be like a real bad gal.
Okay, Amin, how about you? What's your favorite beverage?
That's a hard question. I was going to say a dawa.
Adawa.
Or,
Good one.
Kahawa is king.
Yeah, Kahawa
Or-
is
or-
king.
or
Thank you. I've been
queen,
waiting
or
for
queen for equity's sake.
There we go.
Listen, I'm good with king too, but I've been waiting for someone to say Kahawa. No one has said it on this show. People have been saying chai every week. So thank you for bringing Kahawa to the conversation. And then lastly, what is bringing you joy?
Oh, wow. So many things. I think these days, my babies, I think my
Yes.
babies are bringing me joy. I think, just every time you look at a child, I'm a lover of children, and, they're always around us. They're driving us bonkers. It's loud. There's music playing. Kids are dancing. Kids are fighting in our house all the time. I think when I just take a pause and I look around, I'm like, Alhamdulillah, this is, the biggest blessing to be surrounded by that beautiful noise. So.
Your babies. Okay, I mean,
Yeah.
you can't say the babies, so you gotta
Well,
get some
family,
difference.
but learning for me brings me joy. I'm very ambitious. Although we're outnumbered on the home front,
He's there on his guitar. Ding, ding,
I'm
ding,
still
ding.
pursuing, the things
Okay.
that,
You
that,
taking
that
guitar
I
lessons?
love. Actually, I spy on my son when he's taking his guitar lessons.
Okay.
And then I try to apply it when they're all sitting at the dinner table. I'm enforcing order.
That's excellent.
It's true.
That's excellent. Well, listen, I just am so glad to be in your orbit, to share space and community with you. I just love you both.
Thank you. The love is
Appreciate
so
you
mutual.
so deeply for the work you do. We're having a lot of fun and we're laughing, but the work that you do is not easy. It does come at a cost. You're the kind of educators that lose sleep at night over lesson plans and how did that conversation go, and did that parent feel heard, and did that student feel seen.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I just want to say I see and hear and appreciate your work and your deep commitment to students and equity and communities, not just the ones that are in your classroom that, know you're as Mr. Hussain and Ms. Khalil, but those everyday people that you pass every day. You are educators in and out, through and through, and you are light and you are salt and you're a blessing. So thank you. Thank you for being on Salam and Hello.
Thank you, Lily,
So
so
glad
much.
you're here. These folks don't have much of a digital footprint out there, but we are going to link in the show notes their website so you can find Indigenius Education and reach out to Sajda and Amin. And I would love to hear from you as well. So you can always send me a message at lily@salamandhello.com, or just follow us on social, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You know how it is, at Salam and Hello. And join us next week for another episode. Peace.